what exactly has gone awry here? It looks as though, after a pretty strong start to 2012, labor readings were looking improved, even GDP.
Yep.
There was some optimism. Now all of a sudden we seem to be answering every good reading with a bad one.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's mixed. It's not like everything has come in terribly. It's not like we're not doing a double dip here. At least there's no indication that we're heading in that direction. But the labor market is clearly not as strong as we had seen earlier this year. We had that disappointing March reading, and now we've had layoffs start to tick up. It's a little muddy. Don't know about the weather, don't know about the impact of Easter was in a different spot this year, but there are pretty serious indications that layoffs are picking up a little bit and that hiring has slowed. And then you've got manufacturing, which seems like it has slowed down a little bit in the last few weeks. And then we have housing, which is continuing to be a drag and really has not seen a meaningful pickup. And so you put those things together and you say, are we kind of heading for another one of these spring slowdowns? As you said, like we've seen the last couple of years.
But unlike the last 2 years, though, we've seen retail and particularly automotive sales have done really well. So we have that big disconnect between jobs potentially slowing down and car sales have really taken off, at least in the United States.
It really seems like for the first time in this recovery, consumers are starting to kind of pick up their piece of it. We had manufacturing and exports really kind of drive the recovery in the early years, and now we're seeing consumers pick up a little bit. Consumer confidence has not really been hit by those high gas prices, and now gas prices are starting to ease a little bit. So again, that could be a sign that maybe we'll get through this and it'll be more of a blip rather than a big slowdown like we had the last couple of years.
Well, and but Ben, how much of this is being exported either from Europe or from China?
So far, the evidence is that it's not a huge piece of it, that a lot of this is still a domestic situation. But you have to look at Europe, you have to look at China, and that starts to show up first in our manufacturing. We're not going to be exporting as much if Europe is slow and if China is coming in for, call it a hard, call it a soft, but some kind of landing. That's going to have an impact in the U.S. And of course, if Europe really goes off the rails again, then you start to have the questions in the financial markets and potentially hitting confidence, and that's where it can really show up in a bad way.
Why are some folks kind of looking at the weather, at what we had in January and February, as you said, muddying the waters? Why does the fact that it didn't snow very much, at least out east?
Well, the theory is that we had a very warm winter and that may have pulled forward some activity. That people went out and they spent money in the early part of the year that they may not spend later. They built houses potentially, say, hey, we'll get an early start on this, but that doesn't necessarily mean you actually want to build more houses. You just pull that activity forward. That may have made the early months look better than they really were, and that could also be making the more recent data look worse than it really is. Obviously, over time, that's going to smooth out and we'll get a better picture of what's really happening.
Well, but Ben, this recovery has been unlike any recovery from an economic recession that we've seen in 2 or 3 lifetimes. I mean, you've got to go back to, the World War II era when you're talking about this kind of a slow rebound from economic recession. Is it in fact just going to be the case that we're going to stretch this thing over a longer period of time and that we're going to be frustrated because it doesn't appear to be the same kind of recovery that we'd like to see?
Well, look, that's been the story for so long, right? As we start to see some pickup and everybody says, oh, we're reaching escape velocity, we're getting out, it's going to be self-sustaining now. And then that slows down and people say, oh, we're heading back for a double dip. So far, it looks like the story of this recovery is slow, modest, halting growth. And that's a pattern that we've seen before coming out of financial crisis recessions in the U.S. and elsewhere in the world. And we seem to be following that pattern.